So then, we are back with one of our understandings from the Renewed Covenant from the time of the Second Tabernacle Services, writings where we find in the Aramaic a copy from the original manuscripts, then translated into English, either from Hebrew or Aramaic, given us then in the starting of the time of the end. And during the time of the Mashiach, he gave many understandings and many explanations of the Leviticus 23rd chapter. As Shaul the MashiYach, then he was explaining in Hebrews 10, he came very close of explaining more of the mysteries of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings related with the closing of the age. And he said, Shaul the MashiYach, for in the Torah there are then shadow of prophetic events to come, and he was explaining then the understanding regarding these specific portions of Leviticus translated into time in the earth. So then, for in the Torah there are shadow of prophetic events to come, not the substance of those feasts. He's not speaking of the substance of the feasts themselves, or then the act of participating in a holy feast. He's not speaking of this. He is speaking of what they signify related with the time in the earth. The agenda of the Creator in terms of the time and prophecy. We find these very clearly in Leviticus the 23rd chapter. But those who were then born during the time of the seat, always reading from the scandalized scripture, they won't understand the shadow prophetic of the events to come from the Torah. First, because a lot of people, they believe the Torah was abolished, and you can't abolish and understand then the future, where then the foundation of the apostles and prophets, or then the Shilishim and the prophets, are then based upon the Torah. The only portion of it that was abolished, and the word abolished has to be changed with a completion, were then the sacrifices of animals. Those were demands of the law, demands for death when there was sin. And then the rest of it was yet active. So then we find ourselves during this time understanding what it means, the shadow prophetic of the events of the Torah. If you don't think so, what is your gifting? Because you have to show yourself apt of showing what it means truly in the scripture, and you have to find on your own back to the Torah. You have to understand what it is and explain it if you don't think so. Since you do not have any gifting in terms of understanding of the function, then you have to understand the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and then Leviticus 23rd chapter. It is imperative to understand the future. So then, the autumn feast is coming, and we are then living the last 20 to 22 years, the most of this age, until it closes. The Mashiach was very specific because he spent time with Samaritans, indicating 1,000 years each, couple days, 2,000. He left then the spring feast while then completing the entire Torah related with the spring feast, and he gave them 2 days of his special time in the earth, completing the spring feast, and he gave them 2 days, 48 hours out of 490. And he indicated they would receive then their Gentileship for 2,000 years. The Mashiach was born in 4999. We understand this factor. He spent time with the Samaritans 5031, and he was placed on a pole 5032. So then you begin to understand what it means 2,000 years when you read Revelation 20th chapter. The first 1,000 years of his people would be in charge. The second would be in a Hashden, ended in 2008, along with the covenant of death that was then terminated. So then, we entered the time of reduction from MashiYach, the 24th chapter, and then also the restoration period from then YirShiyahu, the 61st chapter. And we understand the chapter 1:8 of YirShiyahu also gives us the site where the first holy city is going to be at. So the scripture is truly on time. The problem is updating our understanding so we can be in line with the Mashiach's teachings. And so far, a lot of people, they want to go back to the old junkies. Always going back to the old junkies, going with the flow of the world, expecting another type of Mashiach coming outside of the holy tabernacles and does not exist. Read what MashiYach Shaul said in 2 Corinthians 11:4. What does he say? If any person comes to you and teaches you another Mashiach, a Mashiach outside of the holy tabernacles, or another gospel, or another spirit, then be sure of it, you have the false Mashiach. The false Mashiach always goes with the flow of the world. Because Nahashtan is the, in quote, God of this age, or God of this world. And going with the flow is going with the world. The Mashiach, however, was to be found in the holy cities and in the Holy of Holies, because he had taken the place of his Father when he came and completed his spring feast. So then the situation is becoming more clearer and clearer, and then as Yahweh moves on with his holy plan, then the holy cities are returning. It is very simple. If you expect then a person to come from the dead and explain to you, as then the Mashiach was explaining those who are going to be in torment if they die without the Mashiach, and then if a person would return from the dead and explain, they would not believe it. Because the Mashiach already said they have already enough information, so they must believe what he said. However, Abraham said, even though if a person would come out of Sheol and explain these factors to the people, they would not believe it, though they have the prophets and also the Shilishim. Meaning, the people, they have seared minds. Try to understand what MashiYach Shaul said to Timothy. At the end of times, they would have minds as seared as with a hot iron, because they do not understand what it means, the second tabernacle services, as the Mashiach then explained, and then Shaul was transitioning the people into then the plurality of the city rather than singular. Thus then the returning of the cities. When you read then Revelation, the 7 cities, you are reading the holy cities. When you read the 6th chapter, you find the souls linked up in the spirit with each of the Holy of Holies. The souls of those under the altar. And in fact, it is not altar, but altars. It's plural. They did not understand what the Mashiach was doing. The Greco-Romans, when they received the pile of Megillas and they began to translate, they did not understand of the plural part of the tabernacle. They were thinking of the tabernacle of the desert. That's why they translated altar in singular rather than in plural. They were ignorant, so as most of the people in this world. That's why at the end the Mashiach said in Luke, very precisely. And we can go back there and read, because it's very important what the Mashiach said. So then he was explaining then the time of the end, and upon his returning, he was then explaining the many factors related with it. And we can read these and understand it, because what the Mashiach was saying, many people are going to be taken unawares. And then he said, for they were eating and drinking and taking wives and giving them to husbands until the day that Noah entered the ark and came the waters and destroyed them. And again, it was in the days of Lot that they were eating and drinking and buying and having plantations and buying and building. So then, but the day that the Lot then went out from Sodom, then Yahweh rained down fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them. Thus will it be in the day of the showing of the Mashiach, when he comes back for his people. Then afterwards comes the shower of sulfur, as it was during the time of Lot and the cities of the plain. That's how the earth is going to be destroyed after the autumn feast. So then, the Mashiach is already explaining, because there are a lot of people that are going to be doing this while they are unaware. As they were mocking Noah, they were mocking Lot, so at the end of time they are going to be mocking those who are of Yahweh, and then they are going to go through as if it was then a mocking situation, and then the time comes, expires, and destruction comes. So then, we must be very sensitive on how to understand this new time that we have entered ever since '08. Because the Mashiach, he did explain very precisely what it means. If you don't think so, then what is your gifting in the Spirit? Where do you show in your own scripture that is not true? So then please stay tuned. Much more coming up.